And I'm your host, Robert Smallwood, publisher of IG World. And today's webinar is From Content Overload to Harvesting Information Value, featuring Jeffrey Dunning of Integro. Just a little housekeeping first. Also joining us to help Jeffrey field questions at the end of the webinar is Mary Kate McDonough. And you'll see polling questions during the webinar to provide live feedback. So please vote and we'll post the results in real time. Also, there's a short survey at the end of the webinar that we hope you'll complete. This webinar is being recorded, so if you'd like to review it again or share with colleagues, it'll be available within 24 hours. I'll introduce Jeffrey in a moment, but first, here's what you'll learn today. We'll talk about how to get to and do more with the good stuff, how to make your content of value actionable in a way that enhances your business, and extracting greater value from your content can really pay off, and we'll find out how. Now let me introduce Jeffrey Dunning, who's VP of Strategic Initiatives and Support at Integro. He's an information governance technology leader, consultant, and architect with more than 25 years of experience helping large enterprises tackle highly complex data challenges. Jeff is on the front lines of working with customers in content cleanup, email management, and enterprise-wide records and content management systems. Jeff has mitigated volumes of sensitive data, implemented email management solutions for Fortune 500 companies, and architected solutions handling billions of documents. Now over to Jeffrey. Jeffrey, are you there?
Yes, I am, Robert, and thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. Hopefully the time you take out of your busy day will be valuable here. So let's just jump right in and get going here on a topic that's pretty important and kind of on the top of a lot of our customers' minds. But why is this a big thing? Like, why are we trying to get to this content of value, or what's the goal behind value? And I think these two statements here kind of set up what we're doing here. But in a benchmark report done earlier this year, almost half of the respondents said it's challenging and time-consuming to find the documents they need. So it's hard to get the content they're looking for in the context and the time or the format they're looking for it. And more importantly, 83% say they've had to recreate documents that already exist just because they can't find it. So we have this content overload problem, and we're just creating more of a problem because we don't know how to make our content findable and searchable and usable and actionable in our business. So this is going to talk a little bit about how we can kind of get to that realm and a little bit around techniques and stuff that's out there. So what is content of value and how do we find it? So let's just start off kind of with a bigger picture. And I like to use this little heat map here to kind of explain. And the way to really go about this is it's the concept of peeling back the onion. It's the journey towards really getting significant value out of content that's important, a business valued content. You do, simple metadata type indexes. We get rid of R.O.T. We dispose of content we don't need, and we get the outer layer going. Then we do things around simple file analysis and use some of the information we have about content, maybe it's names and folders and stuff, to start maybe doing simple kind of classification. And then from there, with the classification, we start looking at content similarities and finding things that are similar in content to kind of then add some metadata. And then from there, once we have classified of some sort our content, we can get deeper in and use things like machine learning and artificial intelligence to do entity extraction, or if it's multimedia, to look at pictures. But you kind of have to slowly peel back the onion, so to speak, to get to that value or that content of relevance, right? Here's a thing that kind of looks at just the volume of content to relevance and what we're looking at. So we kind of look and go through discovery and analyzation against content, say shared drives or SharePoint and stuff, and find content that falls in three areas. We got R.O.T, regulated, and then high business value data, the stuff that we can use in our business, and we'll look at different ways we can use it, but stuff that provides value back to the business. And so what do? We get R.O.T, we quarantine it, we delete it, we remove it out, don't do any of the high pricey actions against it. We remediate our regulated data, right? Let's get rid of risk where we can. In areas where we need to keep that regulated data, let's make sure it's secure, so eliminate risk or secure risk. And then what do we do with that business value data and start using some of those new technologies out there, and then that's how we kind of get through that. But it all starts with a content cleanup and an analysis of your content. You have to go out and start to look and find and understand your content better. The starting point has to be this analysis. And, you know, I think one of the things that we're trying to do is to change the discussion a little bit. We talk about content cleanup. We talk about eliminating the rot, you know, getting rid of the sensitive data and that type of stuff. But for me, it's more about cleaning up the content so that what's left is the needle in the haystack that we can then begin to do some business optimization or process optimization with, right? So let's get rid of our rot. Let's get rid of stuff that we don't need. Let's mitigate our risk and get rid of our sensitive. So now that we have content that we can start using in other areas. So it always begins with a cleanup to kind of get that stuff done. So our first poll question here, Mary Kate, if we can pop that poll question really up, is content cleanup a priority for your organization? So just to get a feel for where our audience is. Are we doing something with content cleanup today? We're not sure where to start. We're not really doing anything. Like, just to get a feel for where the audience is. It's kind of nice to know where everybody is on that. I call it a journey, right? It's a content cleanup journey, content analysis type journey, and we'll go there. So we'll get a few more responses in here, and then Mary Kate will shut it down, and we'll look and see where everybody's at on that journey of cleaning up content, and whether or not it's a priority for your particular organization.
All right, I'm going to close it now. It looks like we got a lot of votes in so far, so here are the results.
All right. So it looks like a lot of people are working on a plan, right? Working on a plan, or it's something that they say, hey, we got to get this done. So that's good. So it's definitely the starting point and all that in this process of getting value, right? Is that cleanup side. So I'm coming up with a plan, and we're gonna talk through that part of it here real quickly a little bit in the beginning of our thing, but that's really good. So okay, so we're gonna move on with the slides here. So I think the important thing to know, whoops, I went out of presentation mode. Hold on, guys, sorry about that. That's better. So the important thing to know is not rot should be all treated the same. One of the problems we have in our cleanup processes is that we try to do too much work in each pass, right? So one of the things that we found in order to kind of get through these processes is to try to look at content in smaller buckets, right? To go after smaller groups of data, but then to really put those in different buckets and use confidence levels. And those confidence levels will then drive the confidence to actually perform actions like delete or quarantine, right? And those actions will be dependent on confidence, right? There's no reason to treat it all the same, and we should put our efforts into the lower confidence stuff. The higher confidence stuff, we should just go. So if we look at it in this view here, high confidence rot, you just delete it. It has no business value. You set some policies around it. You find files, temp files, old log files, 0-byte files, whatever the policy says. It becomes this high confidence rot. Minimal, if any, business review, it just goes to delete because we're comfortable with our policy. The middle bucket, medium confidence, we're going to do some business review. We have fairly good confidence that it is rot and we don't need it, but there could be some stuff in there that's important. So what we're going to do with that stuff is we're going to quarantine it and delete it after some period of time, right? But again, minimal business review. We try not to go back to the end users. We try not to go back to the department, the compliance group, whoever's running this program is going to do it. The lower confidence stuff, that's the stuff where we're not 100% sure on, right? We're going to need the business to help us get through that. It also could be just some convenience. People can have photos or music and stuff like that on shared drives that we want to give them the opportunity to capture before we go ahead and remove it. It's against policy to have it for an organization, but we don't want to just delete stuff that might belong to people. We want to give them the opportunity. So we're going to review some of that stuff. We're going to give some things. And once we get through it, we're going to make some decisions on actions, quarantine it, those types of things. And that's the way to really get through it. So you have people working, you have work streams going on, and you're actually getting through data because it's smaller buckets, easier to understand, and there's confidence levels around actions that you're performing. So we get through our R.O.T analysis, and we do a similar thing with priority levels around sensitive data. And this is not about R.O.T cleanups. I don't want to go too far, but again, we put priorities around our risk. The higher the risk, the higher the priority. PII with high risk, let's go get it right away. Hits the top of the list, let's figure it out. Remediate it, delete it, secure it, whatever the case is. And then as you go down, and depending on how you're finding your sensitive data, regexes are definitely more accurate in results when you have credit card numbers, stuff like that. When you start using terms, social security numbers, it's just a string of numbers, less confidence, and we're getting hits. We can have false positives. We need more review. So again, easier to decide at the top, more review on the bottom. But the same thing after smaller buckets of data. And then we have all this content now in these buckets that's manageable. And the next important part is the markups. This is where we actually do review of the content and we're choosing actions, right? So we have all this content to us. We group it by relevance. We try to find different things in metadata that helps us reduce our stuff going back to the end users. So we're going to start tagging data. And what we found to do tagging data is to really make it more visual than textual. So in a content cleanup process, you get back a lot of textual stuff, file names and directories and all this type of information. We found it to be easier to come up with a BI tool, some graphical way to display your results and give the people doing this markup, doing this decision making, ways to click into the data. So to look at more data. So we have it, here's it by file extension, age, and different ways. And there's a whole bunch of different ways you can slice and dice the information up to go about finding it, right? Here's another slide that gives it to you by counts. So you can click in and find some counts. So we've taken results from tools that do content cleanup, and we've massaged them a little bit and put them into some BI tools. And these are the tools that our governance practitioners or our clients are using to kind of get through their cleanup process, including some reports around looking at statuses and where am I in the process, and how many have identified, have I actually deleted any, and some of it on hold, so kind of status type reporting. So the reporting part of it is really important for everybody involved in the project to see the progress we're making, as well as it's a lot easier to work with it visually than it has been in the past working with it textually. So that's important. And then the other important part of a cleanup is really the people. Having approvals around our actions and policies is the utmost importance. So if you're planning if you're planning a cleanup process, you should be looking at your policies and what is the definition of R.O.T, what kind of sensitive data does an organization need to keep, what is a specific type of personal information that you as an organization might have that you need to go look at, and have the approvals and stuff in so everybody has the confidence to apply the actions when the time is right. Make sure the data owners are understanding what we're asking for and minimize their impact. So don't go with them to everything. Try to use your confidence levels to keep them there. Having people who've done it before is by far the best way to really get going at any kind of pace, right? They know the processes, they've seen the anomalies, they've been through cursory reviews. A lot of content across organizations is the same. So they can get things going a lot faster than you do. And really, again, the findings review and structuring that. So now we've cleaned it all up. We've gone through that whole cleanup process, and we're going to get now into really what I was hoping to spend a lot of time on today is, so after we've cleaned it up, we end up with content with value. It has some business value, and it should have minimal risk. So we identified our risk, we got rid of our PII, we got rid of our R.O.T. We've identified this as having some value to the organization. And it's across the board, right? Invoices, contracts, project documents, just people's work in progress type content, but it's all value the company now has some value in it. So how do we make this usable? How do we start getting that value out of that content, right? The first thing, and this goes back to what we opened this whole thing up, is make it findable. I use the word findable. It's searchable. Put the content in context. I heard somebody say just the other day, how can I get content to find me, right? So how can I get the content to know that I'm looking for it? I put in some terms, and that piece of content says, yep, I'm relevant to what this person is doing right now, right in place. So we have to make our content more searchable. Searches must be relevant by content, not location. We've been doing a lot of work by location. We now have to do it by content. It has to be relevant to the terms or the content. So how do we do that, right? Metadata and tags. I think it's the two best ways to get this stuff done. We have to have the support to be able to do that. Just a quick number up there, 93% can't find documents because they've been badly named or tagged. So we're trying to tag them, but we're just not doing a really good job. We're trying to come up with naming conventions, but we're just not doing a really good job. We all got our network file shares, and we tried to put some folder structures in place and some naming things years ago, and that was how we were going to make sure everything goes. And people have turned, and different people in places, and different people work different ways, and all that foldering and all that stuff has now made it harder for us to find stuff. So we have to make it findable. So that's the first thing we have to do. Then next, we have to make it actionable, right? So we have to turn business content into corporate assets. We have to use it in business processes, collect it, store it, utilize it, and share it, right? So how do we collaborate more on this content? How do we use content to make a decision in a business process? A piece of content with a piece of metadata that we extracted in a process that it just kind of gets through an approval because we let the computer make a decision. We've got to make it actionable, and then we have to obtain insights from content analytics. So finding similarities in that content and grouping them and doing things like that. So findable, actionable, and then we have to make it available, right? 81% of people say access to corporate documents say they need access to on their mobile devices, yet only 38% are quick and easy. The workforce is changing. We're going to talk a little bit about this later, right? But access and store on any device, available when I need it, and put it in my critical business applications. Optimize our workforce, right? So let's begin using this content to do these types of things. It's got to be mobile. It's got to be on my iPad. I got to be able to get it remote. We got to deliver it when it matters, not later. Like we to say, I really need this piece of content. I really need this invoice, or I really need this contract. I'll get it tomorrow when I get back to the office. It's not optimizing our workforce. So available is the next one. And then most importantly, we need to govern it. So how do we govern all this stuff now? How do we keep ourselves from having to do cleanup on a regular basis, right? Let's start using retention by metadata. Define retention by the context of the document, not locations, right? Let document classes drive retention rules. Secure it by classification. Make it private or whatever your sensitive or whatever your classifications are, and then let those classifications drive access and security and those types of things around that content, and maybe where it's even stored and what part of the network it's allowed to go, right? And then go after our regulatory compliance with metadata and tags, right? Let's go and say, these are my regs and these are the things I have to abide by, and how can I make those tags and put that on my content so I can start doing things like GDPR, FINRA, and that type of stuff, right? So that's what we need to do with this content of value. Simple, easy, probably not so much, right? How do we make this a reality? How do we enrich the content to leverage the value? We have all this content. We say it's important. Now, how do we start enriching it? That's the term we use, is to enrich it, to make it more usable so we can do finding and action and all that type of stuff. And metadata really is the key to unlocking the value of the content. We have to get to content platforms, content services that allow us to start using metadata to provide these type of activities against our content, right? So what is metadata? It's descriptive data that labels a piece of content. Basically, it provides meaning to content, right? So we get these metadata management opportunities, right? A natural way to think and organize and find content. So if we make this consistent as we go through stuff, having taxonomies around our metadata, right? Tags are really nice. The big difference I always call between the metadata and a tag is tags tend to be very specific in nature. Pull down list, right? You're always choosing one. Maybe it's a content type and you pull it down and it says invoice or project document, and that's kind of a tag. Metadata can be a little bit more freeform, and depending on the content type, the metadata kind of will change. We try to use tags consistently across a platform, and metadata is more specific to particular documents. So my metadata on an invoice would be different than my metadata on an HR document, for instance, right? But they would both have similar tags that said content type, HR doc, content type, invoice, those types of things. So that's kind of how it went. And let's start using entry templates. You know, one of the things we can do today is start putting entry templates into our content creation processes. So wherever we're creating specific content, have these templates and start getting some consistent taxonomies there. And what we're doing is we're trying to put a wall up to stop our problems from getting bigger and putting our go forward data into a place where we can now find it and use it and make it actionable before we go back and get the rest of the stuff in the background. So begin having that engagement of the user. And then entity extraction. We'll talk a little bit about, you know, what's going on in the world of machine learning and AI that's allowing us to get entities. But think about having content related to customers and having the customer number along with that piece of content. And then in any business application, if you know the customer number, you can then expose all the documents related to it. So there's opportunities there to get those entities, invoice numbers and customer numbers and those types of things. So metadata becomes the key to unlocking the value in this content. And we have to use it beyond our standard ECM systems today. We have to get it into more of the mainstream file sharers and content services platforms and things like that. So we have to modernize our platforms to allow us to begin taking advantage of metadata and tags to make all this happen. Our next poll question, just to get a little feel before we get really into the nuts and bolts around metadata and some of the ways that we've seen companies do it, but how is your organization using metadata is our poll question number 2, just to see if we have organizations out there that are actually making use of it to help them find content, to maybe retain records and or information governance. Maybe you don't do it. Maybe you're not even sure whether you're doing it or not. But you know, there's a lot of place for it. It's I tell you, it's been around in you know, older ECM systems for a long time. It's a concept in, you know, the SharePoints of the world and stuff like that. File shares, not so much. I mean, it's harder to get metadata on there. Again, we've been using location file names to kind of get that stuff. But just to get a kind of feel there for where your organization is with the whole metadata movement, so to speak. And as soon as we get some answers in, we'll there we go, we're sharing it. So yeah, so really nice. So a lot of organizations using it for retention and information governance. A great way to leverage metadata, right? So that makes it starts to make that process just a little bit more doable. And then we're using it also to find that content and keeping it clean, and that's important. So it's really good. A lot of people are using it. So we'll show you some other ways you use it, some of the things we're seeing out there in the field. So we'll keep going here with the presentation. But so some of the things we're seeing, and every time I pop out of the thing, I go out of that. All right. So some of the ways we're seeing it is we're having companies use what they have, right? So we do this file analysis process, and we end up understanding a lot about your folders and your file names and things that you've used in the past to just store content on typical Windows shares. Let's begin using that. Let's look at the similarities across content and some of the names in those areas, and let's just extract them out and use that as metadata, right? So maybe we're migrating to a content services platform, and the first thing might be just to do a simple, I'm going to grab some folder names here that make sense. Now that I understand it, because I've done this this cleanup and analysis, I'm going to use that to begin my process, right? This is simple, early on type stuff. Expand on similarities. Draw conclusions from what you have today. A folder name called invoices, and there's a whole bunch of PDFs and stuff after it, and we touched one or two of it. Well, you know what? That content type of invoice might be a very simple tag to go put on that content. And all of a sudden now we say, here's our invoices. Now it don't matter where we put them and how we store things anymore. We can change the way we use folders, but we know they're all invoices. And then we can kind of peel the onion back on those invoices, as we'll see as we walk through here, peel the onion back and get more information out of them to be able to use them later. But at least we're starting to understand the content we have there. So expand on those similarities you find. And like anything else, from content cleanup through this entire journey, there's low-hanging fruit. Let's just go get it. Go do the things you can do simple and easily and start seeing the benefits you have and get people excited about those benefits, and then they're going to want to do more. And then you get more buy-in and you go on. Don't try to engineer the whole entire process completely up front. Understand that there's going to be things that are going to be simple and easy to go after, and we want to kind of go after them. We want to kind of make that move to go towards them to start getting wins. I feel like in this journey from content cleanup and analysis and all the stuff, it's the wins that keep the momentum, because it's not a simple 3-month project. It's a longer term journey that you're embarking on, and getting the wins as you go through it are the things that keep the project kind of, I always call it the log rolling down the hill. We don't want to constantly be pushing the log up the hill, right? We want to get the log rolling down the hill. And those low-hanging fruits and those wins are what gets us there. It also gets the people involved a little bit more exposure to things that are going to make it easier as we go on. So we use what we have. We start with what we have before we try to get creative anyplace else. And then file analytics. There's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of file analytics tools and platforms that'll give you things to identify content based on what it is rather than where it is. Like find the similarities, find the terms that are cross things, the clustering, right? We find, clustering was used really big in e-discovery type things, but you can turn clustering into helping you with your metadata, because you're finding terms that are agreeable across document sets, and you can start identifying them there. And really pattern or term matching. The goal here is to go after the bigger bucket approach, right? We're not trying to singularly label every piece of content we have. We're trying to put content into buckets and put metadata or labels around those buckets. So we're trying to simplify the process into the bigger bucket approach. Having 2 or 3 terms that are fairly accurate about a piece of content is a lot better than having the folder name in which that content sits in, and that's the only thing we do it, and we're browsing, right? Browsing on my mobile phone is not a simple thing to do. I need to be able to put 2 or 3 terms in and get the content back that I want, that I need at that particular time, wherever I might be. Sit in front of a client, ask the question, I want to be able to get that back. I want to be able to, I'm a salesperson, I want to get my data sheet back, those types of things. This is going to help us getting to that level by doing these types of things. So a lot of great file analytics tools on the marketplace. Just do pattern, term matching. Look for terms that are important to your organization. Everybody, we talk about taxonomies. We can build that stuff out, and everybody knows the terms around the content that's valuable for them. Yeah, are we going to miss some stuff? Absolutely. But we're closer to where we want to be than we were before we started this journey. Today we're browsing. Today we were not getting content back in searches. We're duplicating content because we have to recreate it. We're doing all these bad things. We just start simplifying it. And if we start getting really, we get hits and start getting some results back, we're going to get people jazzed about wanting to do it. So don't get so small. Stay a little bit bigger and do a bigger bucket approach and look for the similarities and the pattern matching type stuff. And then the next thing you do is, once you start understanding your content types, is to use machine learning and artificial intelligence. I know it's a buzzword and there's been a lot of talk about it, but it's real. It's gotten to be real. There's a lot of tools in the marketplace from a lot of great vendors, a lot of SaaS offerings that allow us to do some of this stuff simple, and then really getting out and kind of really getting deep with it, right? But we can do document type classification with simple machine learning models, right? It'll find templates and agreements and contracts with very little learning. Being able to just give it a few documents and go out and find where all this stuff is in my place, and then being able to say, this is what this is, I can go put my tag on this content. Finding topics, right? Looking at a whole bunch of content and finding main topics in there and just coming back with keywords, so to speak, right? So bringing back keywords. We're going to see a little bit of this in some of my screenshots here as we go forward. But finding topics around the content itself, again, subject analyzation, and then what is the document about? And this is really the key part here is really entity extraction, being able to pull out maybe a customer name, a customer number, an invoice number. Maybe there's amounts in there, right? Think of a loan processing application. If there's an amount, a requested amount in there, and you can pull that out, and now you could use that amount in a decision branch to say, hey, here's the credit score, here's the customer information, and here's the amount they're looking for, and I can make a decision on approve, disapprove, or route to a human to take a further look at it. I'm automating, and now I'm getting through a lot more type stuff. So use the content within those documents to make decisions in your content. So where we do simple things like document type to really hard things like getting that information out of the content that comes to me. Maybe it's for governance. Maybe it's pulling out people's names so that I can do GDPR or whatever the next reg that comes down, which says, hey, you got to be able to identify all the data that belongs to the people in your organization and how you're using it, right? So maybe we have to do entity extraction just to get people's names out, to understand where they exist and start getting a better feel for there. So it's more of a regulation type thing we have to go after. And then the last one is image analysis. And this is important because this multimedia is becoming more and more part of our content. More pictures are being taken, more documents are being scanned with phones and sent in, and imagery and video is really becoming important for a lot of different things. And being able to tag and categorize these types of images and what we're looking at, understanding that there's people in it, or being able to translate the voice on a video into text. So now that video becomes searchable just because you full text indexed the text. Image analysis is a big step in the process because it's more and more in our content. We still have all this text stuff that we're dealing with on a regular basis, but images are becoming more important with the change in the mobile phones and how people want to submit stuff. And I mean, we all do it. We take a picture of a receipt and we send it in to somebody. All that stuff's happening. So machine learning and artificial intelligence helps take care of it. So text capture for enrichment. I want to talk a little bit about this, right? So this is about getting an invoice and then being able to use capturing that and enriching that document. So now I have this invoice that comes in, and we've been able to do it for a really long time, and we have our scanning applications that all went out there, and you can check off fields and kind of say I want this information from this information. But there's more stuff out there now that's doing this stuff kind of on the fly, that understands key pairs, and you can bring in and say, here's my workflow for invoices, and I'm going to send it to you and say, this is an invoice, and you're going to use your key pairs. And they're all formatted differently, but at the end of the day, I start getting out this information. And if I can get just a subset of what we're showing there, right? An account and an amount and an address and a customer and, what the title is of that stuff. The value of all that information to me now in a business process, or being able to attach that when a customer calls in and they can say, I got a question on my invoice, and you can just hit a button and bring that invoice up because you have that information. We start to optimize the business. And I know some of this stuff, we've been doing a lot of it in the past, but it's not been the simplest. It's been a little bit hard. Just sit down, you have to kind of go there. Lots of new stuff coming out where it makes this stuff a little bit easier. Really with the text analytics, right? Sentiment, phrases, the language, being able to just look at text and then finding the key phrases, and maybe sentiment matters in a customer service app, right? But these are the things we can do with ML and we could begin using these to have that happen. So we can take these key phrases and put them into a content services platform and now make them searchable. We could use these terms to search on. So maybe I want to say, hey, give me all the stuff related to the Space Needle, and boom, I get my content back, right? Power of metadata is what you're seeing there. And then there's all these vendors doing all kinds of stuff with all kinds of cool stuff with audio and video. Box Skills, just one of the many platforms that are out there that can look at a picture and just give you all kinds of information back about that picture. And then findability around audio and video, very similar, right? Translate the text, come up with some key terms, a transcript about it. They can do things like they can show who's talking in a video at any particular given time. So there's just so much going on in that space as well. And this is important for us to start using this against our multimedia type of content. And the use cases for this just goes on and on, right? These are all things that we're kind of looking at in various ways, right? Forms data extraction, the text analysis, we talked about it, but we're using machine learning and AI and defensible disposition and privacy compliance and even some email management stuff. It's really different use cases to consider when looking at machine learning and AI. It's really something that is good out there. And then the next area I want to talk about really quick is just entry templates. And I know that this concept's been around for a really long time, but it's important to start really looking at, as I mentioned earlier, to kind of put that barrier up and say, hey, going forward, we're gonna do more to make our content searchable. We're gonna stop the bleeding, so to speak, right? We're gonna start here. The legacy work's going to be a lot of work, but you know what? If I have my taxonomy, I have some systems that support this, I'm going to go out and start using entry templates to drive some metadata, to get the users involved, to make it consistent, right? And really importantly, let the content creators define that content. So let them start having say in how it gets tagged or what the metadata around it is. How does it get found, and how do you kind of use it? Right, so that's the last way, the simple way, the thing we can do today once we put some thought into taxonomies and consistency and how we want to be able to go after our content and what's important for our organization, because the organization, what you do for a living is going to be important around what some of that information needs to be, right? You're going to have terms that are specific to you. So what's the true value of all this? So if we do all this work, what am I really going to get back? Like, what am I going to get back? What's the pot at the end of the rainbow? What's my prize for doing all this heavy lifting to make my content there? So before we get into that, and I think we got this answer a little bit before, but let's just check again. So the third poll question, is your organization using metadata for information governance? So it could be information governance around retention. It could be information governance around regulations. It could be around GDPR. It could be, California privacy that's coming. It could be all those different things. But are you using it? I think that's, for me, in some of the world, is I find that the metadata really helpful in the business side of it and process automation and all those things that are happening. And I think that adoption is going there. But more importantly is we keep driving that, we can then get to a point in time, and Mary Kate, whenever we get enough responses there, we can flip it, even though I'm talking here. But when we get to a point where that becomes consistent, then we can say everything we're doing as we go across here is, so a lot of people are. So that's 64% are kind of doing it. So that's really good. So once we get to this point of doing more of that and getting it everywhere, okay, so we get to the next slide here. We get to that point of doing it. Next slide. So we get to that point of doing it, we start coming up with the concept of, there's a few things that we kind of preach out there a little bit, is we're doing governance in everything we do now, right? So every piece of content we're creating has a retention associated with it. Now that retention can change, right? I created it today, it's got a certain retention. It's a draft, it becomes a final, it becomes a record, the retention changes, whatever that process happens to be, it kind of changes. But I'm now placing that level of governance on everything I do. So no matter where I'm creating this content, whether it be in an ECM system that's semi-structured in nature, whether it be a piece of content I'm creating in maybe Word and saving out to some content services platform, I'm putting, whether the user's doing an entry template or we're using AI to tag that stuff, we're putting governance on everything. We're saying, okay, this is sensitive. This has got some information around people, and here's the field that defines who those people are. Now I have this layer of governance that's been missing in our content across the board. We're having a hard time of retention and disposition and defensible and all those things. We start layering that metadata across the board, we're getting that full level of governance. We're putting retention on every piece of content that we're now creating, and we're getting to where we really want to be in the long term. So that's one of the big things, but we'll talk about some of the other stuff. So metadata is all about providing that content. We talked about it. It's just a natural way to organize and find content. Of course, we need systems to support it, right? And that's an important part of this. But it's all about providing that content. So it's just a natural way to do it. And putting content in the right context. So in use cases, everyone in that use case uses that same content in some ways, right? So we can start associating and building relationships, maybe across repositories or across places where content is stored, because we have similarities in our tags and our metadata. And maybe when I'm doing a process, I have the ability to not only search my file shares to get the information back, but it also reaches into SharePoint because a couple pieces of content there. And all of a sudden, they're disparate systems that I'm bringing them together through like search terms. So I'm able to federate my search, so to speak, but my terms are similar across there. So we're starting to use that same piece of content. I can let the metadata drive my security. I can let the applications drive security into the content, because I don't always have to expose the whole entire folder to the world. I can expose the application to the world. I can expose a small application into a user community, and I can let your rights in there define what you get to see. And if a piece of content says classified on it, it's filtered out in your research results, even though you might have access to that folder. So I have a new layer of security. But we need the clarity and the context of all that content to be able to do that, right? So roles-based management based on that metadata. So we start to use this metadata to retain and govern and regulate and let us be compliant to our regulations. It helps us secure it. It keeps our private data private, our classified content away from people who shouldn't see it. There's just all these benefits of how I can start doing that. It starts with the taxonomy. You have to define it up front. You got to be able to say, here's the pieces that are important to do that, and kind of get that done. But once you do, you can get to these really cool benefits. And why is all this important? It goes back to a lot of those statistics that we are looking at, right? Challenging and time-consuming to find documents. I can't find the right version. I can't use it on my phone or my iPad, or I can't use it when I'm sitting in front of the client and they ask me a question about a data sheet that I just didn't have with me, but I know it exists. I just can't get to it on my phone, right? If we do taxonomies and tags and use machine learning and AI to get higher accuracies, our tagging and our labeling becomes better, right? We've defined some clear guidelines on how things should be labeled. And these are all the things we deal with today across the board. And the problem is we have a ton of content. We don't have simple ways to really access it and use it and find it, and all those other important aspects of making content findable, actionable, usable, and all those other types of things. And that really was where the problem lies in a lot of what's going on. And again, retention and compliance. A lot of you doing it. This is probably more of a kind of preaching to the choir here a little bit. But for me, it's one of the easier ways to do retention and to do some classification of sensitive data and putting tags on things once we find the sensitive data and say, hey, we need to keep this, but it needs to be secure, it needs to be labeled. Well, let's begin to do that, right? Let our DLP systems begin to use that metadata to kind of keep that content from moving around. So many ways we can do retention and compliance using metadata, and probably the simplest way to do it. Some things you think about here, and these are more kind of examples out there, but you can automate archiving with meta-driven workflows, right? Let the metadata drive your archiving. The user doesn't have to get involved, right? We ensure policies are being followed because the workflows are just processing through and using the metadata. And of course, there's going to be exceptions and those types of things, but workflows can handle those exceptions, and we'll get it to the right people. But let's start automating types of things. Let's get rid of content. Let's dispose. Let's archive it. Let's move it around. Do what we have to do based on that metadata, right? Just approval processes based on metadata. We have deadlines and guidelines and have things to have to follow. So why can't we use metadata to go through an approval process? We can say if it's below these thresholds, it doesn't have to go here. Or if it's below these thresholds, it just moves on and goes forward. Do some decision management using that metadata so that we can just let processes go and kind of be a little bit quicker. This next area is an area that's absolutely exploding. So process automation and being able to expose content to business processes, being able to have content follow the journey along, making content be, just this content layer and layering all these applications across the board. Single content layers, got the taxonomies, got the metadata, and now I can go out there and just small SaaS tools that might make my life a little bit easier can now have access to my content. I can attach it to those processes. Again, make decisions on it. And then more importantly, right, make it content available. I got an app on my phone. Let me be able to use and pull up that content on my phone. We now become able to optimize the workforce. So now we're getting more of our workers. Let our workers do the high value stuff instead of the swivel chair automation, as I would like to call it, right? Where they have, one system that they're using to put some information in, and they have to kind of flip back and forth between screens so that they can pull the information off the piece of content that's only available to here in these other ones, right? If we make that content and expose it or scrape it or use AI to get the information we need and populate that for us, we start to eliminate that stuff. And who doesn't want an organization where we're kind of doing high value work? We're doing the work that matters, and we're spending more time with our clients or whatever the case might be because some of this back office stuff, we're able to automate it just because we have content that's important to the organization and we enriched it a little bit. So now we can use it a little bit better. Just some samples. A manufacturing company, a library of images, the pictures about their products and stuff like that. Just, go through, get all the metadata, right? Just one of these simple SaaS services that brings back these keywords. We get it about our stuff, and now we can share those images with a global network of dealers, and they can just put in, hey, I want to see the image of, this cog. The next thing you know, boom, it's up, and they got it on their phone, and they could show it to whomever they're dealing with, and all of a sudden there we're sharing what we have, and we're making it available to somebody else out there. The energy thing, there's some collaborative document management, right? Making content consistent and up to date. We talked a lot earlier in this webinar here about 83% of people are recreating content because they can't find what they need. How often is that recreated content 100% accurate with the document before, right? Consistent, up-to-date information delivered to every party at any time, any location. Think of the energy world where there's people in the office, people at a drill site, or wherever they might be in these different locations, and having the knowledge to know that whenever one of them puts in a particular search term, we're all looking at the same documents at the same time, no matter where we are, right? We're not having to recreate examples, or we're not getting the prior version, or that we didn't get the update that happened today because it wasn't properly tagged, or I don't have access to it at all because I'm on my phone and that information is just not available to me, right? So start automating and optimizing your workforce out there. And then the last thing that's important to talk about here is the changing workforce in the marketplace, right? We're in the age of search. I know myself and a lot of my colleagues, we grew up with browsing. Everything was folders, and we browsed through them. My email was in folders, and we just, that's how we worked. And then that's changing. We're in the age of search. People want to search for stuff. They want to have all their emails in their inbox and just be able to use the search bar and get their emails. And they want that for their content. I can't stress it enough, any device, anytime. Speed and easy to use, and pictures and multimedia. And what's important to note here that we're seeing is it's not only our customers, it's not only the people who are using our goods and services that are looking to be able to do things this way, right? They want to be able to interact with us as a business on their mobile phone or via search, and they want it to be simple and easy to use. But our workforce is changing, right? The people we're hiring now to be our knowledge workers, they work a little differently. And if we don't update our systems to support those knowledge workers in those roles, we're going to have a harder time getting that talent. That talent's not going to want to come. They're going to want to go where the tools are cool and they can work on a mobile phone, or maybe an iPad is the only thing they need. They don't need a heavy laptop, and it's what they're accustomed to, right? Touchpad and all that stuff. We have to get to there to continue, managing our workforce. It's got to be simple, easy to use, and pictures and multimedia have to be part of it as well. So that's my spiel there, and I guess it's time to take some questions. So I don't know if we talked much about it, but you can enter your questions there in the chat window, and Mary Kate can kind of tee those up for us here a little bit. Well, let's take a couple questions and see what everybody's thinking.
Great, Jeff, I have some for you. Let's do this first one that we got here. It reads, our organization is interested in content cleanup and getting to the value as you've discussed in this webinar. What's the best first step?
So the best first step, and I think we mentioned it a little bit, I'm a big fan of making sure that you have the buy-in, right? So get people on board that have a position of authority, that they can say, we're doing this and this is right for the business and here's why. So get people, get a sponsor, someone who believes in what you're doing, and really spend time on your policies and your actions. So what am I going to find? What are my policies? What do I consider R.O.T? What are the things I want to identify and make sure those are done? Get approval of those policies, and then understand your actions. Am I going to delete stuff or quarantine? And if I'm going to quarantine, what are my exception process? But I think the more time you can spend up front having those conversations and getting people involved around those areas makes the actual going through the content and making decisions. And someone I work with a lot has the term is to get the courage to make those decisions, or to get the courage to action your content at the end of the process. So when you get there, 4 or 5 years ago, we did a lot of this work and we never got that courage. We never got that courage to make a decision on our content. And I think policies and smaller buckets and looking at it in different smaller confidence levels and stuff like that gives you that courage at the end. So I would spend it on policies.
Awesome, thank you. We have another one here for you, and it reads, what is the alternative to using taxonomy? Using taxonomy requires a lot of training and it is quite restrictive. How about contextual searching? What is the state of technology in terms of contextual searching?
Yeah, so the taxonomy is helpful because the contextual searching is going to require a larger level of effort. So it's kind of the peeling back the onion there. You get into that middle part, it's going to require a little bit more effort to really get that fine-tuned so you're getting back the relevant content. The taxonomy, the one thing with taxonomies is we've always gone, and I think I probably didn't mention it, but I think it was on one of my slides. We've always, in my opinion, always tried to over-engineer it. We've always tried to really get down into granular type of taxonomies. And I think the big bucket approach applies here across the board. And the taxonomies is going to get you to a point where you now have your content in smaller groupings or similarities and maybe document types and stuff. And then contextual searching might be easier to apply against those smaller data sets. So I would still suggest that maybe not the heavy, over-architected taxonomies that we've used in the past, but to be a little bit more big bucket approach to it so that we get content and similarities and then start using the more advanced technologies like conceptual searching against those smaller pieces where we really know we have a really nice data set that's going to lend itself well to that. So I think in our experience, both kind of play well. Both are needed for this to really be effective in a good size organization.
Great, thank you. And let's see here, there's a couple. Can metadata be added to the electronic files in our corporate network or file system? And what about an email?
So that's one of the problems that most organizations struggle with today, is that depending on what you're using, and in most cases, it's not. So your typical shares where you have a drive mapped to, like an S drive, and it's your corporate share, and you got a marketing folder, we typically can't get a lot of content. We can't get a lot of metadata in there. We can do things like content types and start using some templates in our productivity apps to get us a little bit, but we really need to look at modernizing to more effective content services platforms to allow us to start leveraging that. So a lot of the typical network file share stuff does not support metadata that you really needed for these types of things.
Great, and then last question here, Jeff. What's the difference between metadata and tags?
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about it earlier, but for me, the tags are really something that we try to use across our content layer, right? So everything has similar tags. Content type might be a tag, document type might be a tag, creator might be a tag. They're consistent across the board. Metadata is more tied to a particular grouping of content. It could be metadata associated with an invoice, right, which would be way different than metadata I associated with an employment document. So metadata has a little bit more flexibility and is associated to more at the content type level, where our tags are typically across the board, and that's how we like to use it. Tags are typically more pull down, very specific in nature. We use them on everything. Metadata sometimes could be free form, could just be keywords and those types of things. Metadata can be multi-value and stuff like that. All right, so I think that ends it. So before we finish here, I'm going to hand it back to Robert to close this out, but I appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, very good, Jeffrey. Appreciate that. That was great insight in terms of looking out at how to get to and do more with the good stuff, and actually some good sort of nuts and bolts into the weeds there a little bit. So I think a very valuable webinar for the participants. It'll be recorded, and within 24 hours you'll be able to access it online if you'd like to see it again, or if you didn't see the whole webinar, or if you'd like to share it with your colleagues. And so that'll be ready here tomorrow. And thank you for attending this IG World series of IG Academy Solution webinars. Thank you.